The gavel came down like a gunshot, and the courtroom fell into a silence so heavy you could hear the wheels of his chair creak as he tried to sit up straighter. "Mr. Daniels, rise for the court," the judge snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, her finger already pointing at him like an accusation before a single word of defense had been spoken. 200 eyes turned. Nobody in that room knew that the man in the wheelchair was about to say something that would silence the judge, break the composure of a hardened bailiff, and leave an entire courtroom in tears. Before we go further, if you believe in second chances, in dignity, in the quiet strength of people the world too often overlooks, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so you never miss a story like this one. Marcus Daniels had once been the kind of man who filled a room just by walking into it. 6 years ago, he was a construction foreman, the guy who arrived first and left last, the guy his crew trusted with their safety because he never cut corners. Then came the accident. A scaffold collapse on a rainy Tuesday morning took his legs and, for a long time, it felt like it took his identity too. He spent 8 months in rehabilitation learning how to do things he'd never once thought about, how to shift from bed to chair, how to reach a top shelf, how to walk into a room and not immediately feel every eye drop to his lap instead of his face. His marriage did not survive the weight of it. His savings did not either. But his daughter, 7-year-old Ellie, survived it with him, and she became the reason he got up, or rather, wheeled up, every single morning. The court case that brought him into that room on this particular day was not about him being a criminal. It was about a landlord who had illegally evicted him and 11 other tenants from an apartment complex that failed to meet basic accessibility codes, tenants who had nowhere else affordable to go, tenants who had children in local schools and elderly parents nearby and lives rooted in a neighborhood they loved. Marcus had become the reluctant face of the lawsuit, the one who stood, figuratively, since he could no longer stand literally, in front of cameras and city council meetings, demanding that people like him be seen as more than an inconvenience to a landlord's renovation plans. He had shown up to court that morning in his best shirt, ironed at 4 in the morning by his own hands because Ellie was asleep and he didn't want to wake her, determined to represent his neighbors with the same discipline he once brought to a job site. Judge Patricia Kane had a reputation for running her courtroom like a drill sergeant. She did not tolerate lateness, did not tolerate excuses, and on this day, exhausted from a docket that had been overflowing for weeks and irritated by a defense attorney's endless objections, she saw a man remain seated when the court was called to order and reacted before she thought. Rise for the court was not a request in her chambers. It was the most basic expectation of respect, one she had enforced for 15 years without exception, and in that split second of frustration she forgot to look closely enough to see what was actually in front of her. The room held its breath. Marcus's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair, not out of anger, but out of the old, familiar flash of humiliation he had spent years trying to unlearn, the feeling of being reduced, in an instant, to the thing his body could no longer do rather than everything he still was. For a moment he considered simply apologizing and letting it pass, the way he often did to avoid becoming a spectacle. But he thought of Ellie, waiting for him at her grandmother's house, asking that morning why the judge was going to decide if they had a home. He thought of his 11 neighbors sitting behind him, some in far worse circumstances than his own, watching to see if the man they had chosen to speak for them would fold under pressure or stand, in whatever way he could, for what was right. So Marcus Daniels spoke, calmly, without a trace of bitterness in his voice, and said that he would rise for the court in every way his body allowed, but that his legs had been left on a construction site 6 years ago in service of a building code inspection not unlike the one this very court was now deciding, and that he hoped Your Honor could understand that respect was never something he needed to prove with his legs, because he had been proving it with his heart and his hands since long before that accident ever took them from him. The courtroom did not move. The stenographer's fingers stopped over the keys. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. The defense attorney who had been smirking through most of the morning suddenly found something urgent to study on his legal pad. And Judge Kane, a woman who had sat on that bench for 15 years and thought she had heard every kind of testimony a courtroom could offer, felt something crack open in her chest that had nothing to do with legal procedure and everything to do with the quiet devastation of realizing she had almost humiliated a man for the simple, unforgivable crime of a body the world had failed to build for. She did not reach for the gavel again. Instead, she removed her glasses, set them down slowly, and said that the court owed Mr. Daniels an apology, that she had spoken without seeing him fully, and that in 15 years on that bench she had never been more grateful for someone's correction. She then asked, gently this time, if he would continue, and Marcus did, laying out with the same steady clarity he'd once used to brief a construction crew exactly why the building his neighbors had been forced from violated the most basic promises a home is supposed to make to the people inside it. By the time he finished, several jurors were openly wiping their eyes, and the bailiff, a broad-shouldered man who had stood at that door for over a decade without so much as a raised eyebrow, was blinking hard toward the ceiling. The ruling came down in favor of the tenants 3 weeks later. But the story that spread through that city was never really about the lawsuit. It was about the 11 seconds of silence after Marcus spoke, the 11 seconds in which an entire room remembered that dignity was never about standing on 2 legs, but about refusing to be diminished by anyone who forgot to look closely enough. Ellie, when her father told her the news that night, simply climbed into his lap and said she always knew he could stand taller than anyone, even sitting down. If this story touched even a small corner of your heart, please don't scroll away without letting us know. Type, "I stand with Marcus," in the comments below so we know this story reached you, and if you have a moment, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that strength wears many different shapes. Like this video, subscribe to Kindness Corner, and stay with us, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting to remind us all what it truly means to rise.